1, 2, 3. Oh, snap! Woo-hoo! A meteor just obliterated the standard metagame. In one fell swoop, the WotC play design team banned a whopping 7 cards from Magic's premier constructed format. Cory Steelcutter, gone. Up the Beanstock, chopped down. Abuelo's Awakening, finito. Monstrous Rage and Heartfire Hero, squashed. Hopeless Nightmare and This Town Ain't Big Enough, gone, 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 gone. This is the most cards banned in a single BNR announcement in 20 years. Not since Play Design nuked Affinity from the format in 2005 have we seen an exodus this massive, and even then, 6 of the cards banned were essentially the same card, the artifact lands from original Mirrodin block. Never before have we seen this many cards from this many Tier 1 decks axed in a single announcement. Izzet Prowess, Domain, Azurius Omniscience, Mono Red Mice, and Esper Bounce made up 5 of the most popular decks in Standard over the past 6 months. This announcement marks a seismic shift in the Standard metagame. It also makes a bold statement about Play Design's philosophy for both card design and format curation. Izzet Prowess made up 42% of the Pro Tour Final Fantasy metagame. The 5 decks that received bans combined to comprise a grand total of 80% of the Pro Tour meta. The significance of these bans truly cannot be overstated. But are these changes good? Will any of the previous metagame powerhouses survive losing their key cards? And what does the announcement mean about the future of Standard in the long term? As always, when there's a major announcement like this, I wanted to, think about it, take a little bit of time to gather my thoughts, take stock of the lay of the land before I filmed a reaction video. But now that the dust has settled, I think I can take a closer look at what Standard looks like now that it's freed from the dominant grip of Izzet Prowess. Wait, come on, Izzet Prowess is still great? Are you kidding me? How is this even possible? Okay, let's start with a closer look at the announcement, card by card, and talk about why Play Design decided these cards needed to go. The first and most necessary ban was, of course, Cory Steelcutter. The ridiculous token-generating equipment was by far the strongest individual card in Standard since its introduction to the format in Tarkir Dragon's Storm. For many Magic the Gathering players, the dominance of Cory Steelcutter was something of a surprise. Few people were talking about the card in the lead-up to Tarkir Dragon's Storm's release. Not everyone missed it, of course. After all, I put it as my #1 card for Standard. The most powerful new card for Standard from Tarkir Dragon's Storm is Cory Steelcutter. This card is really, really strong. Joking aside, the point of this video is not to toot my own horn. Honestly, I don't even consider Cory Steelcutter that impressive of a hit on my part. What I find surprising is how the card was able to fly under the radar for as long as it did. The card was obviously absurdly broken. You just can't put a token generator that's this easy to trigger and this difficult to interact with profitably into a format like Standard that doesn't have the tools to keep up. And that would be true even if the specific tokens Cory Steelcutter generated weren't extremely potent threats all on their own. These aren't dinky little 1/1 humans. The tokens aren't that far off from little Monastery Swift Spears. Cory Steelcutter was a powerful outlier in Standard, on par with Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Euro Titan of Nature's Wrath. Yes, it absolutely, without question, deserved to be banned. But what about the rest of the banned cards? Up the Beanstock is a broken card for reasons similar to Cory Steelcutter. Just as you can often trigger Cory Steelcutter the turn it comes down, Up the Beanstock always draws at least 1 card before your opponent can destroy it. And because Up the Beanstock is a difficult card type to interact with, the odds that your opponent will even have a removal spell for it are pretty low. In Standard formats of ages past, Up the Beanstock would not be a remotely problematic card. 5 mana is a steep price to pay in any constructed format. But recent card design trends have made high mana value cards with artificially reduced costs more and more common. Just look at Leyline Binding or This Town Ain't Big Enough, or the Overlords from Dusk Morn. This is a well-trod design space in 2025 Standard. The curve of Up the Beanstalk into Overlord of the Hauntwoods specifically was the kind of thing that goes way over the top of anything else in the format. And that curve was due to remain legal until 2027, thanks to the change in Standard rotation windows. As such, Up the Beanstalk was bound to remain a problematic card for the next year and a half. The decision to chop down the Beanstalk was a fantastic one. Abuelo's Awakening was an interesting ban. An enchantment reanimation spell for 4 mana doesn't, at face value, look like a problematic card. After all, Wizards of the Coast put Zombify in Foundations, marking the classic 4 mana creature Reanimate as standard legal until 2030. But because of Omniscience, another build-around card in Foundations, Abuelo's Awakening could continue to threaten to turn 4 combo kill for the remainder of its standard legality again through 2027. This card was remarkably consistent with all the blue card selection currently in Standard. That's specifically true in Game 1, before opponents could bring in their graveyard hate. Personally, I don't think the Omniscience deck was necessarily problematic enough to demand a ban, but it is annoying that every deck in Standard needed to be prepared to die to a turn 4 Omniscience. And I also appreciate the decision to ban Awakening over Omniscience, as I can imagine other, more fun ways to win the game with Omniscience in future Standard formats. The 2 cards banned from the mono-red deck, Heartfire Hero and Monstrous Rage, were phenomenal bans. Mono-red had so many powerful cards in Standard right now that banning any one card from the deck would still leave behind an incredibly dominant aggro deck. There's nothing wrong with a good aggro deck in Standard, mind you, but the mouse package of Heartfire Hero, Manifold Mouse, and Emberheart Challenger has been one of the best things to do in Standard for long enough now that it's understandable many Magic the Gathering players are happy to see it gone. Not me, though. Crap like that is how I beat Reed Duke on our episode of Shuffle Up and Play. Did you see that? The Shuffle Up and Play where I beat Reed Duke at Standard? Mono-red aggro, baby. Anyway, whereas Heartfire Hero was a key piece to a dominant synergy package, Monstrous Rage was the kind of busted aggro card that didn't need any specific help to be great. If you attack with creatures, Monstrous Rage is a good card in your deck. If you want empirical evidence of this fact, just look at the top 8 of the Final Fantasy Pro Tour. 4 of the top 8 decks were Izzet Prowess, while the other 4 were mono-red aggro. All 8 of the top 8 decks ran some number of Monstrous Rage. One of the best ways to beat a red aggressive deck in prior Standard formats was with Baneslayer Angel-style cards that provide a huge blocker and gain you life. In the past, red decks needed specific targeted removal to answer these sideboard threats. Those removal spells were still played in some number in red decks, but Monstrous Rage was such an effective method for getting a Sheoldred or other such big blocker out of the way that blocking had become essentially useless against red aggressive decks. Lastly, we have a pair of cards that were played in tandem for a long time, but as of the time of the banning, they generally found themselves in different shells from one another. The choice to ban This Town Ain't Big Enough is one of my favorites from this announcement, but not because the card was particularly dominant recently. More so, the presence of This Town, or Tatabi, as I can only assume you kids have been calling it, made the format incredibly hostile to the 3+ mana creatures that have served as a template of Standard for its entire history. If you play a big beefy creature and your opponent bounces it back to your hand with This Town while simultaneously resetting one of their own low-cost value permanents, you're going to be catastrophically far behind. So while I don't think that Tatabi was too strong for Standard per se, I do believe the warping effect it had on the metagame was one Standard is better off without. Hopeless Nightmare, on the other hand, is the one ban I am a little skeptical of. The Orzhov Pixie Shells that picked up the 1-mana enchantment were one of the more unique strategies Standard has seen. I love any time a breakout deck in Standard uses a bunch of commons and uncommons that players had previously disregarded. That said, it is definitely annoying to have your hand stripped and life total sapped by a string of Hopeless Nightmares. And given Wizards of the Coast is trying to only ban cards from Standard once a year, I can understand the logic that led to the Hopeless Nightmare ban. I just hope that the Pixie decks remain playable without their hand attack engine. There is also a burden on players when this many cards get banned. That burden can be financial, true, but the pain from bans disproportionately impacts new players, as these players are less likely to be willing to buy into a new deck when their old deck gets banned. As such, I generally would prefer it if Wizards never needed to ban cards, but in the case of these specific bans, I think the logic behind their expulsion from Standard is, by and large, sound. Nonetheless, a lot of players just lost their decks, and I think that's a valid concern, especially when it's new players, and I really hope that this loss isn't so great that a sizable chunk of the player base hasn't just given up on the format. Okay, so that's what I think about every card banned in Standard, but what about the cards that weren't banned? Believe it or not, despite banning 7 cards last week, there are still plenty of powerful cards in Standard. The immediate cards I expect to fill the power vacuum are Stock Up, Kaito, Bane of Monsters, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Llanowar Elves, and who else but Vivi, good old Vivi. I'm going to talk about Vivi last, okay? As that Standard Challenge top 4 I referenced at the top of the video consisted of 3 Vivi decks. Let's start with Stock Up, which remains one of the most powerful raw card advantage spells in Standard right now. Of the 5 cards I named, Stock Up is by far the most flexible. Virtually any blue deck could run the card. Though Stock Up was a 4 of in most Izzet Prowess lists prior to the ban, the card actually gets better with Cutter and Monstrous Rage gone. Stock Up had its moments versus prowess, but it was not uncommon for a player to tap out for Stock Up on turn 3 and then lose instantly on their prowess opponent's next turn. Against Mono Red especially, Stock Up was a massive liability. With these 2 aggressive powerhouses gone, Stock Up's stocks have never been, well, more up. Kaito, Bane of Monsters, is a card I have some concerns about in the new metagame. Thanks to its ninjutsu and part-time hexproof abilities, the Dimir Planeswalker is notoriously hard to answer. You can't really counter it unless you have the mana to cast a Tishana's Tidebinder in response to its ninjutsu ability, and you can only kill it with Planeswalker removal on your own turn. Dimir was a great deck prior to the ban, with Izzet Prowess being its primary bad matchup. With the blue-red boogeyman gone, I expect Dimir to pick up in meta share in a big way. Agatha's Soul Cauldron and good old Llanowar Elves are 2 cards that saw only fringe play in an Izzet Cutter world. The 2 cards generally skew toward decks that don't line up well against the fast-paced onslaught that Izzet Cutter and Mono Red both present with ease. There are a number of shells where these 2 cards could crop up in a post-ban world. Let's talk about the big wizard in the room. Vivi makes a strong case for the single best card in Standard after the bannings. If you untap with a 0/3 Vivi on turn 4, it is not difficult to kill your opponent in a single turn, even if they're still at a full 20 life. Cards like Wild Ride, Proft's Eidetic Memory, and Astrologian's Planisphere all buff Vivi's power effortlessly, turning it into both a deadly threat and an absurd mana generator. A devastating combination of traits to cover a ton of bases in terms of the kinds of games you might find yourself playing. It's no coincidence, therefore, that Izzet Vivi decks have been dominating the initial Standard tournaments in the aftermath of the ban. Whether in a dedicated Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck like the one Magic Legend Paulo Vitor Damaderosa played in Pro Tour Final Fantasy, or in the reanimated corpse of Izzet Prowess, or in some as of yet undiscovered deck, Vivi is a genuine threat to crush many Standard tournaments in the years to come. And because its presence in the Final Fantasy set is sure to continue to drive sales of the collaborative sealed product, I am skeptical that the card will ever be banned, at least not until it's in its final year of natural legality. What's more, once Cut Down rotates this fall, one of the easiest ways to profitably interact with Vivi will be tossed out the window. Are you ready for Vivi winter, and spring, and summer, and fall, and then winter again? No, not me either. One more deck that's worth mentioning as a potential player in the new standard metagame is Mono Red. Yes, what is dead may never die, and Mono Red still looks pretty darn good despite losing 2 of its most important cards. Sure, it's no longer a Mouse Kindred deck, but there are still plenty of powerful red aggressive creatures that you can run if your goal is to kill your opponent on turn 3 or 4. After all, Screaming Nemesis remains alive and well. Of the 5 decks most affected by the wave of bans, Is It Prowess and Mono Red look to be the most resilient right out of the gates. After that, I expect some form of Pixie to find its way back into the format before too long. There's just too many versions of the nurturing Pixie effect. Domain won't exist in its current form, not just because it's spilled its beans, but because Leyline Binding and Zur, Scheming Seer both rotate in just a few weeks. But the Overlords remain one of the strongest classes of cards in Standard, so don't count them out long term. The only deck of the 5 that's well and truly buried is Azurius Omniscience. But who knows? Omniscience will be legal in Standard until 2030, oh my god. That is a lot of time for the busted 10-mana enchantment to find another cost-efficient way onto the battlefield. The next important thing that I want to talk about in this video is what these bans mean for Standard long term. In the BNR announcement, the play design team said that the 7 cards banned were largely emblematic of a pair of design pitfalls that they want to shift away from in the sets to come. There are, first and foremost, cheap snowbally engines that are incredibly hard to interact with. In other words, Cory Steelcutter and Up the Beanstock. The other trend is extremely efficient cards in general. Your 1 and 2 mana spells that are strong enough to push all but the absolute most powerful expensive cards out of the format. The play design team said that Standard is at its best when the format is more about 3 and 4 mana win conditions backed up by 2 mana interaction rather than 2 and 3 mana win conditions backed up by 1 mana interaction. This is a particularly important thing to keep in mind with the current method of 3-year rotation windows. The larger a format's card pool, the more the best decks in the format will trend toward the cheapest cards they can. Just look at formats like Modern and Legacy, which are more than anything defined by 1-mana cards and, of course, free spells. More than these bans themselves, which, yeah, I do think were a good decision, a bold decision, but I'm heartened by the direction that this announcement suggests Standard is moving in. With 5 Shocklands coming in the next set, the mana in Standard is about to get really, extremely very good. If Wizards isn't careful, Standard will more and more resemble Pioneer than it will a low-power, low-barrier-to-entry format that's intended to appeal to players new and enfranchised alike. Call me old-fashioned or just call me old, but I like it when Standard feels like Standard. However, that is just my old opinion, and now I want to hear from you. What do you think of these bans? Would you have banned this many cards from Standard, or would you have simply hit Cory Steelcutter and Monstrous Rage and called it a day? What deck are you excited to play in the new Standard meta? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see just how bad these banned Standard decks are, watch us pit them all up against Modern decks from throughout Magic's history on Monday's Shuffle Up and Play. That is an episode you do not want to miss. It's banned Standard versus Modern history. Which is more powerful? You will find out on Monday.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Today, I have brought in CEDH players, but we've built casual decks? I told you bracket 1.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
You said changing the rules.
You texted me. I came up with this content idea.
I thought it was just casual. I know it was a firm bracket. Wait, what's yours? Is your higher
bracket? Mine's bracket 1.
Okay.
You're always bracket 1. That's fun. No. Hang on. Do you normally just carry a Geiger counter around with you?
Did you buy this from Bethesda?
So,
it's a myth, right?
So it's after you draw. What you do for that is...
Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
I hate that.
That's much better. It makes...
I take 5, going down to... I don't know what this is. What are you doing?
It's the tune Take 5. It's a jazz standard.
You got Brubecked.